You're good.
Hello everyone, my name is Maurice. This is Project Dragon. Thank you so much for being here despite the late hour, so let's get this going. So a little bit about myself. I actually have not taken many classes here at Grandview related to computer science and engineering. Rather, most of my time has been spent at CCIC, where last year I bypassed the prerequisites thanks to the teacher over there, which has let me participate. So I took CCIC cybersecurity last year, and this year I am taking artificial intelligence at CCIC. This has allowed me to get some certifications, including the Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, aka OCI 2024 Generative AI Certified Professional, as well as Google Cybersecurity and Test Out Security Pro and Network Pro. So I did have a couple of personal objectives that I wanted to accomplish with this project. I wanted first and foremost to improve my coding skills and knowledge. I did have a lot of struggles in the past. I've had been practicing coding for a while, yet I never really managed to achieve what I wanted with coding. So I hoped with this to be able to improve my coding skills so I can go into the future with college being able to properly program. At the same time, I want to understand more about cybersecurity. I do consider cybersecurity to be a passion of mine, and so it's natural that I will want to improve upon this. I also want to improve my project management skills. As my dad will tell you, I'm a procrastinator, and I'm horrible when it comes to organization and time management. So I really did hope to improve my project management skills. At the same time, I wanted to meet industry professionals. We are going towards the future, we're now becoming adults, and so I must be able to meet industry professionals, I must be able to make networking so that I can ultimately help build a better future for myself. At the same time, I do like having a bunch of little passion projects, which is something I wanted to develop in the future, in this case, the Dragon Project. However, this cannot be accomplished without my wonderful advisors. My expert advisor was Mrs. Spint. She's my AI teacher over at CCIC, and she has helped explain a lot of different artificial intelligence concepts, as well as help my code development. At the same time, I've been helped by my dad, Maurice, who helped explain further certain security concepts, as well as provide financial support. Sorry about that level of support. At the same time, I've also been helped by Ms. Kramer, who has discussed a lot of security chatbots with me, as she has previously done work-related security chatbots, and she has also helped provide questions for my model training. At the same time, I've been helped by Mr. Ko. He is a family friend and a great support advisor. He has helped discuss with me project management, being able to communicate and manage my time, while also keeping my scope in mind. And he has helped encourage me throughout this project. And then we have Mr. Bowen. He is also known as Chief at CCIC. He is the cybersecurity teacher there. And with him, I've discussed various security concepts. So before I continue, we have to understand certain key terms. I'm going to be throwing a bunch of this around like it's an empty dinner. And so to start, we have the National Vulnerability Database, also known as NVD. It is pretty much a government repository of a bunch of different vulnerabilities gathered all the way from 1999, and they are primarily identified with CVE numbers, or identifiers. Next, we have CVEs themselves. These are common vulnerabilities and exposures. They're pretty much known cybersecurity vulnerabilities. Obviously, if they're unknown, they wouldn't exist in this case. And they have unique identifiers to help facilitate communication regarding these specific vulnerabilities themselves. At the same time, a major part of what goes into CVE is the CVSS score, the Common Vulnerability Scoring System. Pretty much, they use various metrics related to attack complexity, the attack method, etc., to help indicate the relative severity of a vulnerability. And then I'm also going to be talking about this a lot, RAM, Random Access Memory. It's pretty much the short-term memory of the computer, and if you don't have any clue what that means, think of it basically as the surface of your desk, where the bigger your desk is, the more stuff you're able to take care of at once. Now, more terms. Artificial intelligence, if you don't know, it's also known as AI. It is pretty much an algorithm which can do intelligence, and I put intelligence in quotes in this case, because there's debates about how intelligent artificial intelligence really is. But ultimately, they can handle tasks such as predictions, decision-making, and problem-solving. A chatbot is a specific type of artificial intelligence designed specifically to, guess what, chat with the user. Now, another term I'm using a lot is RAG, Retrieval Augmented Generation. A problem with chatbots is they tend to hallucinate. They make random responses that, while they sound confident, is utter garbage. RAG is a system to counter that. It's where they retrieve information from a database to help improve their generation as they have accurate information to work with. Another term we use a lot is API, Application Programming Interface. It is basically how different programs communicate with each other. They're pretty much the waiter in the restaurant who can pass the orders between the customer and the chef. So ultimately, I had very ambitious goals. I wanted to automate defense, reconnaissance, analysis, offense, and networking. And that's how I got the Project Dragon acronym name. But that is kind of stupid, to be quite honest. That is something an entire industry has been working on for 40 years. And sure, I'm one guy with 8 months, I could probably take care of it. No problem. My advisors warned me of this, and so ultimately we have refined my project scope by identifying a real-world issue. Namely, that it can be extremely difficult for non-expert users to understand cybersecurity vulnerabilities. And with this, various issues can arise. Management. If they don't understand a threat, resources can be poorly allocated. Resources which can, in a hospital, be used to save lives even. It's poorly allocated, and ultimately the vulnerability will remain. So, I have to ask myself, how useful can AI be in creating comprehension around cybersecurity? And so, to test this out, I've decided to get an AI chatbot that will respond to CVE-related questions in an easy-to-understand manner. This does have to come with various requirements. It will need to be scalable, it will be flexible, and it will need to be efficient during future process and deployment. But please note, this is a proof of concept project, so a lot of it will be limited. So ultimately, I had 5 main project objectives. First, I wanted to create a data gathering program, something that could pull information from the National Vulnerability Database, something that could pull information from known exploited vulnerabilities, so that ultimately I can have a data set with all the vulnerabilities that are in all the government databases. I also need to process that though. Raw data tends not to be very useful, especially when it comes to training a model. So I need to take data, convert it into a format suitable for training AI and for pulling with RAG. I also need to create the model itself, ensuring that it will be conversational, accurate, and scalable. With this, I'll also need to create a front end. No one likes to look at a server all day unless you're me who likes being locked up in mainframe rooms. Trust me, I get it. Not everyone likes that, so we need to create a front end. And then finally, we'll need to actually have a RAG system for the model to ensure it can stay A, up to date, and B, accurate. So ultimately, I did end up having 3 main models, 3 main versions. First was the V1 model. It did have various successes. It did manage to create the data gathering tool. I did have the data processing tool. I created the training program for the model. I created the deployment program for the model. And all of that work fell to crap as it ultimately was a disaster. More on this later. So I went to the V2 model. This one had the same tools as V1, all the data gathering, all the data processing. I kept that all. And I managed to use 3 different models to create a unified deployment program to great success. Finally, I managed to have a 3rd model with a website front end that had increased processing speed and consistency while remaining conversational. So step 1 was research. This made me miserable. I had to understand API usage, chatbot metrics, RAG, AI-related Python libraries, data gathering, fine-tuning, all of that fun little stuff. This made me miserable. However, it was faster than I expected, surprisingly. Largely because this research was actually broken up as I moved throughout the project, pulling from a need basis. However, this did lead ultimately to a fatal flaw. So here are 2 major concepts that have largely dictated how this framework, how this project was able to be done. First is parameter efficient fine-tuning, also known as PEF. These models are incredibly large, sometimes over 100 billion parameters. Why in the world would you want to update all of those? That's going to take time, it's going to take money, it's going to take resources, it's going to make my life a problem. So there's PEF. What it does is it will actually freeze certain parameters, make it so they don't need to be updated, because you don't need to update all 100 billion, you only need to update a few, and PEF does that for you. The next one was researching how RAG overall operated. So as your data is prepared, as it's put into a database, most RAG systems will use a system of vectorization, where based on the proximity of your request, you will compare the most need-based issues, see what's most likely required, provide that information to an LLM, your AI model, to ultimately get a response. I did tweak this process in my V2. And ultimately, I've decided to use Mistral models. In general, they have much more permissive licensing. They're based on the Apache 2, which is pretty much do whatever, just don't do commercial. And they also have much more efficient performance, while keeping a lot of the similar benefits of other models. So I ultimately decided to use Mistral 7B, Mistral 8B Instruct, and Mistral Small Instruct. Mistral 7B was mostly used for testing as it was smaller. Mistral 8B was used for concurrent processing since it was small but also had more of that consistency. And Mistral Small was used more of experimental as it was a larger model in comparison to Mistral 7B and Mistral 8B. I needed to use these smaller models though. Technically Mistral 7B and Mistral 8B are considered obsolete. And that was all due to my limited hardware. And yet, I'm happy because they've still managed to get consistent responses. So ultimately, this is a comparison between different Mistral models on the left, as well as comparison with Mistral 7B and Mistral 8X 7B. So Mistral 8X 7B was actually using a smart mixture of experts. They'll have not one real AI expert, they're not going to use all the parameters, they're actually going to have smart chunks based on the need be. And this has allowed it to have higher overall characteristics in comparison to Mistral 7B. However, in comparison, that's expensive. 100 gigabytes of RAM for inference is going to kill a lot of machines. In comparison, Mistral 7B only uses 16 gigabytes of RAM. So I ultimately decided to go with Mistral 8B, which is a bit of an in-between, where I can still have slightly elevated RAM usage while keeping a lot of the similar benefits. So my V1 project did have numerous successes. I did successfully create my data gathering tool. Good job me. It grabs and merges the information I need. I also have a stable data processing tool. You can see a tiny portion of it, believe it or not, on the right here, where it condenses a lot of the similar information, such as the CPS scores, because there's actually 3 different versions of those. And then it will actually use ChatGPT, because I'm lazy, to automate the process of creating the data sets. Because honestly, I'd rather not create 100,000 different rows and columns just because I want to train something. Don't worry, I did manually parse my data sets just to ensure accuracy. And so ultimately, I was able to create my training data sets, and I used the AI to code a program which will give info to an AI, which will then allow me to train an AI coded by AI. It was a very funny little thing. And I did have some minor roadblocks. Of course, rate limiting exists. Apparently, the government doesn't like it when I grab info from the servers too fast. And I also did fall slightly behind schedule as I was constantly dealing with a bunch of bugs. Trust me, don't always rely on your AI's code. It's not always going to be the best. And one example of this is how I accidentally cost my dad over $200. Because I used GPT-4, I didn't manually check my AI's code. And so now I'm checking my AI code a lot more to ensure that I use GPT 3.5 Turbo and not GPT-4, which can get expensive fast. But that all pales in comparison to my biggest roadblock. It was quite funny. I was finally done with the model. I was so happy. I gave it a test run with my dad, and it talked about the boss baby. Woohoo! So when asked about CVE 2020-1992, it talked about the boss baby. I have no clue why. I checked. There's nothing mentioning the boss baby in that entire data set. So I'll appreciate it if someone can actually explain to me why in the world this happened. I needed to revise my models quite clearly. And so my dad looked in disappointment, but I was pounding my desk in absolute fury. It was not a happy time. But we ultimately moved past this, we crumple it up, we throw it in the trash can, and we move on to V2 and V3. V2 was considered my project goal and success. It did do what this project was designed for. It was memory efficient. It had RAG integrated. It had 3 models working together, and it answered all my questions regarding CVEs wonderfully. At the same time, version 3 that actually used the V2 structure while expanding some of the question classifications and response types while having conversational memory. You can now ask it follow-up questions. You can have a conversation with it It's happy times. Now, what do I mean by 3 models? This is what I mean. When the user provides a prompt to the models, that prompt is actually going to get split between 2 different models first. The first one, C1, will actually extract your relevant information. What CVE are you specifically asking about? Using that information, you will then pass that to the dataset to complete a search, see what is required before passing that to the main chatbot model, the D model. C2 has more limited functionality, which will be expanded in the future, but ultimately provide a classification. Do you want to write an exploit? Do you want a definition? That is what this thing finds out, and ultimately that information is also passed to the D model. Using these 2 informations, the D model will finally synthesize a result best suited to your needs in a comprehensible manner. So the V2 model did successfully pull information from the data sets. As you can see here, when it asks specifically about what CVE 2020-1992 is, C1 correctly identified that was what I was asking about, and it pulled the required information. And the answer was actually relevant. It was not asking about the boss baby. This made me very happy. The problem, you can only interact with it through a Linux server line. I needed to expand upon this. I needed a front end. So ultimately, I began working on the V3 model. It was to further improve the processing speed, and it had a website deployment using an API. And I'm super happy because using my V2 version, it will take 30 minutes to process a SQL request. That's annoying. V3, the average was lowered to 7 minutes. Pardon me. I also have a website deployment. You can access this on my website, dragon.cookie.net, under Dragon Framework. But ultimately, if you put in a prompt, you press Analyze, you will get the analysis results. Although I am still dealing with memory issues. And when I say memory issues, I really mean it. For clarification, my AI server at home uses 90 gigabytes of system RAM and is equipped with a 3060 as a 12th gen Core i5. Basically, it's beefier than my own gaming computer. And it's not a happy machine. It takes up 91%, and this is not even processing, by the way. It's not processing. It's taking up 91% of the system memory when it's not processing, and it's completely using the GPU resources. That is not good. However, I consider the sacrifice worth it, considering it dropped the processing time from 30 minutes to 7 minutes. Thank goodness. Ultimately, I did revise my timeline a lot. This is the brief version of my original timeline. It was very naive. I thought this would be easy. It wasn't. So I didn't properly plan ahead. I did the exact same thing that my advisor, Mr. Coe, told me not to do by not planning ahead properly. So I ultimately thought I'll be all done with my first model in December, and I'll be able to expand upon that. That was wrong. I needed the RAG integration ASAP. So I revised my timeline. I emphasized the RAG integration. I wanted to make sure I got the resources I needed. I got the information. Although I was still slightly naive around the version 3 capabilities. So I had to do another revision. How fun! So ultimately in this one, I revised this in February, where I was mostly working on optimizations to get a web deployment and ensure conversational, so I could balance processing speed with my memory usage. This had much more realistic expectations, and it emphasized the deployment, which is what I needed in this case. So ultimately, this was a great learning experience. I know there's no juniors here, but ultimately, take the Capstone class. I did get a lot of technical experience. I did improve my communication and project management skills, I hope. And I did also get a lot of AI-specific findings. AI can have some incredible benefits. It does help increase comprehensiveness around security vulnerabilities, but it's very expensive if it's not properly optimized. As such, I believe in a system of smaller specialized models. I do not believe in like the massive 300 gigabyte RAM inference that some other models have. And I'm excited to continue working on this Project Dragon in college and beyond, hopefully not bound by technical constraints. So as I get into my bibliography, I'm open to any questions, as this will just lead through.
Is it your plans to make it take up less storage so other people can use it without having to have this crazy computer do that?
Yes, that is a plan. Actually, there are certain revisions I have already made that help increase it. Rather than running all 3 models consecutively, you can break it up into chunks. So you will take ultimately a longer time. However, you can do that with a slightly less speedy machine than I have at home.
But to clarify, the user of your model currently just in the web browser.
Yes, currently the user of my model just in the web browser.
Christian?
What does 5080 help?
Yes, a 5080 will probably help so long as it's not going to break down.
So how much internal did you end up spending on these?
Over $600, getting the hardware upgrades, taking care of the GPT, $200 plus. That was a fun time for my dad. He made me do quite a bit of chores.
I got free lawn mowing for an entire summer.
Yep. Cool.
How long running like this system do you think it would take before your computer just turns into a small baby? It stops running them all.
Well, luckily, I do have a backup plan, actually. If it detects excessive memory usage and heat usage, it will automatically shut itself down as a program. It will close all of the processing. I have tested this. It takes, well, depending on how I do it, if I do it directly through the server's CLI, this doesn't happen. Occasionally on the website, it will start breaking.
Do you think you would be able to like pitch this to like different cybersecurity companies or something like that and not get to the end user?
That's a tough question, largely because the functionality is still limited. You do need to ask it about specific CVEs themselves. I do have plans to expand upon this functionality, and ultimately I do wish to potentially pitch this to companies, but considering the rise of other AI tools such as GPT with search, maybe companies are not as interested in a product like this. However, I am still proud of this project considering that it is a specialized model specifically dedicated to handling this task with less resource consumption as a massive data set.
And it is fair to say that because he didn't keep two of his advisors using without the technical constraint when he experienced that.
Do you have any plans to try to further reduce the response time?
Yes, I do have plans to further reduce the response time. A lot of what I have is limited by CPU. I do have a GPU. It does assist with some of the processing, but ultimately, since so much of it has to run on system RAM, if I had a beefier GPU, if I properly broke down and optimized the program, ultimately I believe I can use GPU resources smarter to help improve the processing speed.
All right, so
I've got a ton, so I'm just going to throw a couple things. Did you ever think about offloading your final chats to cloud service like vCloud or AWS? Because that would be way cheaper than running on your hardware.
Yes, I have tried this. However, when I was using it, I was trying to use Google Collaborative Notebook. It was slightly inconsistent because they're not happy when you spend too many resources at a time, especially when it's using so many resources. I've also experimented with my dad using Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, OCI. That got expensive very fast, to say the least.
I was thinking LangChain. Did you use LangChain?
No, I've not tested LangChain.
Use LangChain. What was your embedding model and vector DB model?
I didn't actually use the vector DB model. When I was using my, that's why I said I altered the RAG implementation. Because ultimately with the C1 model, I will actually be using a local data set so that it will actually pull the specific information, in this case the specific CDP identifier, to do that data set search, get that comparison, provide that response and all the information to the D model to get the final
So
process.
using text SQL and SQL query?
I'm not using SQL either.
So what's the backend?
Ultimately, I was just using a comma separated value, CSV.
So you're loading a file and then
Yes, I'm loading the file and then
searching for the text?
Yes.
Like using your...
Yes. I do have plans to expand upon this functionality, especially as more vulnerability information comes out. However, given the limited time I have, I decided to stick with what I know works and stick with just a CSV.
Well, this kind of thing's what I do for work so much.
Sounds good.
Awesome. All right. Well done, George. Good job.